Hello, and thank you for joining us today at Reimagining the Supply Chain powered by Square. We are so excited to have you hear from our amazing panel today. During our panel conversation, feel free to ask questions via the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen. Now, please welcome Maneet Ahuja, Senior Editor, Forbes.
Hello, everyone. We are so excited to have you join us for this critical discussion on reimagining the supply chain. We know this has been a very challenging year for business owners. An estimated 78% reported a big impact on day-to-day operations for their business, and 38% of which said that supply chain was their main concern. That's why we're here today to prepare you for the path ahead. After today, you'll be able to walk away with tangible advice and best business practices to help you navigate your supply chain amidst the current uncertain environment. I'm so glad you have taken the time to be here with us and hear from our esteemed speakers today. Now, please welcome Ron Busby, President and CEO, U.S. Black Chambers, and Irene Kong, co-founder and CPO, MANTL. Thank you, Irene and Ron, for being with us here today. Unfortunately, Mahisha couldn't join us as she is under the weather, but we wish her a speedy recovery. So first, we would be remiss in not starting the conversation without mentioning supply chain issues are global in the pandemic and have affected every industry in some form or another. The most recent was from Pfizer announcing that their original estimate of 100 million vaccinations is now 50 million. And we are now 10 months from the pandemic, which is ramped up in the US and slowed or even temporarily halted production and now looking forward. We asked the audience in advance what their most pressing issues are facing and what it looks like in delays for shipping and other issues. So we're going to be getting to all those issues here today. So Irene, let's start with you. MANTL launched in February, with shutdowns starting around mid-March. How did you and your team deal with issues relating to the supply chain? Did you have to rethink any of your plans for marketing or launches?
Yeah, so first of all, very excited to be here. Thank you for having me. And we did launch in February of this year, which, as everyone can imagine, was pretty scary and such an unpredictable year. In March, we immediately looked at our budget and thought about how we shifted our marketing. And as a new company, you want to get your name out there. You want your brand to be recognized. But we also knew that cash is king in an unpredictable pandemic. And therefore, we actually pulled back a lot of our marketing paid ads and thought, yeah, we may not grow as fast as we initially planned on or wanted to, but we need to have money on hand in order to operate just day-to-day things, to make sure the supply kept going, to make sure that people who are coming online and buying our products, that the orders get fulfilled properly. And ultimately that allowed us to actually launch a few months later in Nordstrom by having that cash to make the operations happen for that retail launch.
Mm-hmm. And Ron, you mentor a lot of entrepreneurs. Can you share with us some of how you had to help them rethink their supply chain?
Thank you so much for asking the question. Thank you so much for having us here again. I'm Ron Busby. I'm the president and CEO of the U.S. Black Chambers, Inc. We represent 145 Black chambers across the country in 42 states with a membership base of over 332,000 Black-owned businesses. And many of them are in this conversation of how do they have sustainability, how do they continue not just to have survival, but to have growth. Mm-hmm. We know that during the pandemic that Black businesses saw the largest impact, although we lost nearly 450,000 Black-owned businesses between the months of February and April. That also means that there's opportunity for growth. And so the conversation is really now about, okay, what is the plan, the strategy for Black-owned businesses? And for us, we have to ensure that we not only don't lose the businesses, but more importantly, or equally as important, we don't lose the revenue from our communities. And so for us, we're talking about, hey, businesses, before you close the doors, let's have a conversation about mergers, joint ventures, consortiums, partnerships, and where it makes sense, acquisitions. And so a lot of those conversations are difficult to have, because no one wants to start a business only to discuss closing or selling or either partnering from our community. But it is definitely a strategy that many of the listeners, as well as our members, need to be thinking about as we move forward into 2021.
Understood. And what have those conversations been like? I'm sure, like you mentioned, it's difficult for these founders to think about maybe selling a piece of their business or doing what they do to save it during this time. What are some of those experiences like from those conversations?
Well, Irene just had a conversation about how she had to change strategies early on.
Right.
Many Black-owned businesses are first generation. And so for most of us, it is a challenging conversation, but understand that 90% of small businesses fail within the first year. The majority of Black-owned businesses have about 1 month of revenue saved for an emergency or growth or even larger opportunities. And so the conversation really is about, let's have realistic, authentic conversations with intentionality as well as maturity, so that you not only are not losing your business, but you're also not losing your business as well as gaining debt. And so when you put it in perspective, many small business owners are just looking for options to get through this. And so often it's about just me and my, and in this conversations, we really have to talk about we collectively, how do we save your business? How do we save the revenue? And then also, how do we save your name as well as your credit?
Right.
So it's been difficult, but many of our businesses are now understanding that they have to start to think outside the box.
Right. And have you had any personal success stories of businesses that were able to partner and or get a line of credit or funding and able to save their businesses during this time?
Yes and no. And I will say that the differences between those firms that have successfully navigated through this process during these times are really those that have good working relationships with financial institutions. Mm-hmm. So many business owners hear the words, you're not financially astute, you're not financially literate. And I want to tell those folk that are on this call today, that's not a knock on you, your intellect, or your acumen. It just is giving us the opportunity to continue to improve our businesses, to continue to improve our acumen and our skills. Most business owners work in their businesses versus on their businesses. And so we have to kind of change the mindset that, look, in order for you to have success, you have to have good partners, good relationships. I'm saying to our members, this is not going to be the last tragedy or the last pandemic or the last scare. And the first relationship that we need to establish is good banking relationships so that they understand your journey as well as your vision. And so when you go to them with needs and or opportunities, it's not the first time they're meeting you or hearing about your problems or hearing about your opportunities. And so we're telling folks, the first thing you need to do is to go establish that banking relationship.
Awesome, Ron. That's great feedback. Thank you. So Irene, let's talk about consumer behaviors. You're a consumer expert, having been in the CPG space for many, many years and now running your own company. How have you seen them change through the pandemic?
Yeah, I think that you definitely saw a shift, and it's almost with the shutdowns, people had to shift their shopping to the online platform. Mm-hmm. And with MANTL specifically, we have a subscription base and you can do one-time orders as well. We saw more customer questions come in strictly on how to shop our website, which we were pretty surprised about, just because me being at the Honest Company and then at Dollar Shave Club, it didn't occur to me that this is forcing a shift from real-time shopping in person to forcing people who don't traditionally shop online to shop online. And really shifting our focus to make sure that we're answering those customer questions in 12 hours, that it doesn't go past one day. And we're still a really small team, so that does take a lot of time away from the operations piece of it and making sure that the business is running. But that was a big piece and a mindset shift for us in terms of understanding that we have to be empathetic, that people are now who are new shopping online, we need to be there for them. And that was a major shift in just customer questions that we realized that were coming in, instead of asking about how long it takes to ship, or, you know, what if the products are vegan or not. It was all about, well, how do I access my account? Can I pay through PayPal versus a credit card? Just very almost simple questions in our mind initially that we realized weren't so simple for people who aren't used to shopping online.
And as a founder, how did you deal with the supply chain issues that customers were perhaps getting frustrated if there may have been delays? I don't know if you experienced that personally.
Yeah, we actually experienced one of our carriers for the West Coast changing warehouses without letting us know in the middle of the pandemic, which, I mean, in itself, shipping during the pandemic was tough. And then we had this whole major operational shift, didn't tell us about it. And we saw customer questions come in where people were like, it's been a week. And we make sure that our orders get there within 3 to 4 business days. And after some digging, we realized, oh, we actually have this huge issue where in the process of this move, this carrier has actually lost some of our packages. It's nowhere to be found. The tracking is non-existent for it. And we had to quickly pivot and change carriers. And I think this is one of the parts that I truly believe in, is when you go out and you search for your suppliers, whether it's your third-party logistics warehouse, whether it's your shipping carrier, it is so important to get multiple RFQs or requests for quotes, because you may choose your number one option, but what happens with a natural disaster, or if that company shuts down, you need to have a quick plan B. And so when you do multiple RFQs and you talk to multiple vendors within the same space, you automatically know who to pivot to.
And so it sounds like that's what you needed to do. You needed to pivot to a different carrier. And then was it a seamless transition, or were there extended delays? Did you have to end up giving refunds to customers because of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to make it right, especially with this year where, you know, financially people are falling on hard times, and if they're spending money with you, you have to make sure that you're delivering the service and the product that they wanted and that they are expecting. And for those customers who packages were lost, we sent out a second package to them with this second carrier to make it right. And maybe we didn't make money on that order, but I feel like the most important thing is to keep them happy so they come back, especially with our business model.
And the reputation as a business owner, right? So that is innumerable, right? Then that spreads. So you can't afford to get a bad reputation.
When you're online, that's all you have. You have that trust with your customer. Whereas if you're in retail, that gives you a little bit of credibility when you're in a major retailer. But when they're coming onto your website, you have to build that trust.
So I want to shift to audience questions because we have a bunch of them coming in. So Ron, I'm going to start with you. I am a new business owner and unsure of what amount of stock I'll need this year, being my first year online. I know that there are various factors when it comes to a question like this, but Ron, what are your thoughts?
I would tell your participant there 2 things. One, understand your profitability margin. I think so many small business owners are so desperate or so motivated for customers and for sales that they don't really understand where the profitability is. And so Irene just talked about, hey, I was able to send a customer another product because they lost it, which is extremely important. But we as business owners need to understand first and foremost what a product or a service costs us, and make sure that if we understand what that profitability is, that it's where we start. I think a lot of us don't understand good accounting practices that will help you with your inventory. The great thing about now having a lot of this online is you don't have to necessarily keep inventory on hand that you have paid for. If you have great relationships with your vendors, it can easily be an on-demand inventory question where you don't have to necessarily have a lot of your assets caught up in inventory. If you have a good relationship with a new vendor, determine that factor up front and make sure that you're there. Then the second thing I would think that is extremely important to all of the listeners, and that is about payment terms, both in your payment as well as your receivables. We are good at saying we're going to make sure that we pay our vendors on time, but we're very lax on when we get paid. Lots of folk want to do business with the federal government. Understand that the federal government may give you a contract January 1st, but you may not get paid for it until July, meaning that you have to carry the float for the federal government sometimes for 6 months before you get paid. Understand your customer, understand your customer's payment terms, and make sure that you're building all of that into your profitability margins.
So what can business owners do to help bridge that gap, right? If they're on this month-to-month basis where they're just making ends meet and now they're faced with a pandemic and supply chain disruptions like we've seen across the globe, right? If large companies like Pfizer and major retailers can't negotiate and have dependable supply chain right now and have trouble making ends meet, what are the small business owners supposed to do?
And I tell small business owners, as I used to be one, all business isn't good business. It's great to have great clients, great to have great customers. Pfizer is one of our sponsors, but understand you're running a business to have a profitability. And so just to have revenue without having profitability is only going to create more stress. The average Black-owned business is paying twice the interest rate at a bank for the same loan as a white business owner. So going to a bank to get funding may not necessarily be the best vehicle for many of our smaller businesses, especially if we don't have good financial documents when we're going to get a line of credit. And so lines of credit are great, but understanding that when you go to visit a new client, maybe you give them a discount for paying net 15. Maybe you give them a larger discount if they pay upon receipt of product or service. Maybe you ask them to pay you up front, but you have to understand where your limitations are as well as where your opportunities are. And if you know that, hey, I'm gonna need my funding immediately based upon my cash reserves, and this being a cash flow business, you have to have those conversations early, if not before, going in, accepting a contract, or even for that matter, a new customer.
Got it. So Rana, it sounds like you're saying to also take the emotions out of it, right? Like these are difficult times, difficult decisions, and maybe your first thought of getting a bank loan doesn't make sense, and try to be creative to come up with an innovative solution.
Now, I'm going to say most small businesses don't have the opportunity to go get a line of credit when they start their business. And so I would tell people that are listening, first off, I'm not telling everyone to go into business for themselves. 90% of small businesses fail, and they fail primarily not because of acumen or skills or how much work they put in. It's because they don't have enough funding up front to carry them through the difficult times. These are difficult times. Make sure that if you're not, if you don't have a partnership with the bank, then have a partnership with either another vendor that will say, look, when you get paid, I'm going to take a larger percent of the profitability from this contract or this product or this particular invoice. So you may use your vendors to help you get through tough times as well, but you have to be creative. Banks right now today aren't necessarily just making loans, because there's a lot of businesses that are going out of business. But as I said, I think this is a great opportunity to find those businesses in your local communities that may be doing the exact same thing that you're doing, or have a business similar model that could be able to support what you're trying to grow.
Awesome. Thanks, Ron. I want to shift over to Irene. I've seen some examples of companies positioning items as exclusive and doing big drops ahead of the holiday season and asking customers to buy now and that they'll ship later. Have you witnessed that? Has that been an effective strategy as a way to circumvent some of the supply chain delays?
I've definitely seen that with some companies. I do think that it is pretty difficult to implement for a skincare company. Just the fact that it's such a hyper competitive space. And so unless you are really offering something that no one else has in skincare that can't be solved by any other brand, I think it is pretty tough to ask for a pre-order that is going to not arrive at their doorsteps for months. However, I feel if you're a beauty brand that has a more of a technology, a tool that is proprietary to you, that has an IP, that makes total sense. But I do think it is a little tough for just basic skincare items.
And a lot of questions that we're getting revolve around affordable and sustainable shipping options. I've heard a few stories of small business owners finding it cheaper and faster to fly to another state and pick up their items as delays in transportation continue to happen and can charge thousands of dollars. What do you recommend for those facing delays in terms of finding other alternatives?
That's a great point. For our products, it's a little difficult to hop on a plane and carry it back with you on a passenger plane. Everything's on pallets. But in a very similar way, I've seen my coworkers and friends look at other ports. So, for example, Long Beach Port here in LA, it can take a long time, especially around January, right before the Lunar New Year. It can get really congested. And I've seen companies look at shipping to Mexico via ocean and then trucking it across the border, which was actually faster, and in some cases a bit less expensive.
Wow. And about supply chains improving efficiency and getting products from suppliers through networks, what are some tips for getting items delivered on time?
What I always say is don't underestimate the power of creating a timeline. And this is something that I learned at the Honest Company. My last 2 years there, I was asked to join operations and to build out a project management PPO department. And when you lay out all of your tasks from ideation all the way to launch, you realize there are tasks that are bottlenecks that you didn't even think about before. And you were actually working and scrambling on tasks that really didn't help you launch any quicker. And so really build out a timeline, get a software like Smartsheet or Microsoft Project that actually helps you identify what your true critical paths are. So you know what tasks to truly work on. And then make sure you have those conversations. It's normal to have an 8-week queue for factories to plan their lines, but those 8 weeks queues are now like 4 months, 5 months, 6 months with the pandemic. And really get on a call with your supplier to understand what each week entails. And you'll come across things like, oh, well, this supplier can actually put me in the packaging queue for my bottle until I deliver artwork because I want to direct print. But if I label, they can put me in the queue 2 months earlier. Wow. So when you start to unravel each week, you realize sometimes you just have to pivot what you're and be willing to compromise. Maybe I don't direct print onto my bottle and I print a label, because guess what? Printing a label takes 4 weeks. And then you can get into queue a lot earlier, or understand why it is that you have to wait 2 months before they can produce your bottle. Maybe it's a bottle that isn't produced very frequently by this factory, but if you decided to go with another bottle where they run it all the time, you can get your bottle or your packaging a lot sooner. So I think it's really important not to take that lead time at face value and really ask your supplier to break it down for you.
That is super insightful feedback, Irene. Thank you so much. I feel like I'm prepared to start a business after hearing from you. Let's go to another audience question, Ron. How are this person's concern is around production. The production process takes too long. It can take 2 to 3 weeks, but with a long waiting line, it can take up to 4 months before I receive my goods. What's the best course of action for this person, Ron? And I think this plays a little bit to what some of the advice that Irene was saying, but I would love to hear it from your financial perspective and just overall business side.
Well, I actually like the question that the previous person asked about getting paid up front. I think it's very creative. I think it may be few and far and in between of individuals that will pay you. But if you go to, you know, a big box store right now, you'll pay for a product and may wait. I ordered a table just last week and they said it's a 16-week waiting period, but they took the funds up front. So now they have revenue for their firm to create the supply chain as well as the logistics. I don't have an answer for your question there, other than you just got to look at, as was discussed, each item, each logistic step, and see where you can save days. And that's like anything else. Days turn into weeks, and then weeks hopefully end up turning into a shorter period of time. But I think the most important thing is just effective communications. If it is going to be 4 weeks, maybe you send someone an email update monthly or weekly to say, hey, here is the step that your product is in right now, so that they feel like they're involved in the production. And that will help an individual feel like, okay, it's coming soon, or I know what's happening, as opposed to having a customer that's unhappy about the time frame. I think customers understand and really work with you the more you have them involved in the process.
I couldn't agree with you more. I personally agree with that. I had placed an order for a new couch in the summer, and the delivery time frame came and went, and I didn't get a note. And you know, I got very upset. I called the company I purchased it from, and then they explained what was going on, and then from there assigned somebody to just give me regular updates. And now, even though I'm not going to get the sofa till probably January or February, they gave me the option to cancel, and I decided to just stick with it. So that's
I would just say, yeah, be proactive versus reactive.
Right.
Keep people in the loop. People are much easier to deal with when they're informed about what is happening. And so I think most customers, if they have decided to buy your product and or service, then there's a commitment there. The key thing is not to lose them because of the time delay. So you really want them to be involved. And more importantly, you want them to be a double customer. You want them to come back. You want them to refer other customers to you to purchase your product or service as well.
Right, a rebound customer. So a couple more audience questions. So one is, how are you managing inbound supplier disruptions, damages, PO issues, and etc.? Irene?
This is a great question. And I think with now, during this year, it's even more important to make sure that your products are arriving in a good condition, because when you go back to reproduce everything, the lead times are that much longer. So it's really important to make sure that you're inspecting the shipments as they come in, and that you're not just putting the boxes away and finding the issues as you're unpacking it to deliver it to a customer, because that, you know, time has passed, and then it becomes that much more difficult to go back to your supplier and work out a solve. But my learnings from all these years in startup is to do the appropriate testing to avoid that situation altogether, especially being in personal care. Bottle leakage is a big thing, or maybe you didn't appropriately freeze test your product and you're shipping it to the East Coast. It's in the thick of winter. Now your product is iced and it exploded out of the bottle. All those things are avoidable if you do the packaging and the freeze thaw tests ahead of time. So this is something that I'm a big believer in: know what you don't know. So if you don't know what tests you need to do in order to avoid these future issues, then go on Upwork, hire experts. And with Upwork, what's amazing is that there's reviews from the previous employers. You can interview them. So you're not committed to working with anyone that you feel lukewarm about. And it's actually how we've gotten through a lot of the things that we don't know, my co-founders and I. So think about how you can test for worst case scenario ahead of time. And if you don't know what tests to do, then seek out experts.
Sorry to interrupt. So basically, yeah, know what you know and your sweet spot, and then feel comfortable enough to outsource for help when you need it.
Absolutely. And a lot of the things, these things can be avoidable. There are packaging tests. There are drop tests and vibration tests to make sure that even the shipper packaging that you put your product in is sound, so that when it gets shipped via ocean or truck, or if it gets dropped by mistake, that the product that it's housing is still safe.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, we got two last questions. So another audience question here. What logistical and digital softwares can you use to possibly increase productivity? Ron, is this something that you have any perspective on?
Not at all. And so I have to pass that one off to
Back
Irene.
to Irene. Okay, back to Irene. We're going to go to you.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back and say, although a timeline doesn't seem like it's a logistical thing, it really is. And so from ideation, when we have a project idea, to the time it takes to formulate, to test, to find the packaging, to get the raw ingredients, to production, how much time it takes to ship from one place to the other. When you list all those things out in excruciating detail, it forces you to ask questions to yourself and to your suppliers that you wouldn't think about asking until you drop a PO. Like, here's the PO, how long is it going to take? Versus when you're trying to,
like a safe run, so to speak, right?
It's a safe dry run, and that will really help you understand where the roadblocks are. And even going back to the question about, oh, it takes 2 to 4 weeks to produce, but my supplier is telling me that it's 4 months to get my products. When you build out a timeline like that, you realize, oh, I need to know how long it takes to get the raw ingredients for my formula. And when you ask that question early on, let's say it takes 2 months to get a raw ingredient, and that's what is adding 2 months to your PO timeline. Well, you can always issue a letter of intent where at the very beginning, months before you even drop your PO, you can go ahead and procure that raw ingredient to shorten your overall lead time to get to launch. But a lot of those questions fall to the wayside when you have a million tasks going on.
Right.
And what's great about a timeline is, like you said, a dry run, it forces you to think about questions that you forget about.
Great. So we like to close out all of our discussions with a lightning round, and I think we're about to wrap up. So I wanted to ask one last question to both of you. If you could leave our audience with one key piece of guidance on managing their supply chain in this market, what would it be? Ron, let's start with you.
Sure. I think for me is business owners need to be intentional, especially Black business owners. And I say that because at the U.S. Black Chamber, we are pushing the envelope, going to our corporate partners, having good conversations about increasing their diverse spend with Black firms, not minority firms, but with Black firms. And many of our corporate partners are saying, great, Ron, we'd love to do more business with Black firms, but either they don't have the size and the scale, or we cannot find them. And so for those that are listening that are 51% Black owned or more, make sure you stop what you're doing after this call and onboard your firm at byblack.us, buyblack.us.
Okay.
That way they can be found. Secondly, look to other businesses that are doing similar types of products and or services in your communities. Make sure you learn from them, partner with them, because we need the size and the scale to make sure that we're not missing out on the opportunities that corporate America is trying to give to Black-owned businesses currently.
That's good advice. Irene?
Be willing to pivot, be willing to compromise. I think when you are building a business, it's your baby and you have this vision that you want, and you want everything to be perfect. But especially during times like these, that being flexible, being versatile is what's going to help keep you alive. And maybe you don't have that perfect artwork or product that you wanted initially and what you had dreamed up at launch, but you can always go back and change it later and make it perfect later and tweak those 1 or 2 things. So that is what I've been keeping in mind this entire year, launching in February.
That sounds like great advice. It kind of sounds like the real insight there is don't disrupt your own supply chain because it's not perfect.
Exactly. And it's so easy to get a tunnel vision with every little detail and trying to make it perfect. And sometimes it helps to just close your laptop, go for a walk, and think about how I can pivot. What am I willing to compromise on?
Mhm. And as a founder, you also have to be mindful not to burn out, right? You're under tremendous amount of pressure, and you can't burn the midnight oil trying to get every last detail perfect. And you got to focus on keeping the trains running on time. Awesome. Well, thank you to our phenomenal panelists, Irene and Ron. You are both fantastic.